Now that the president says he'll soon sign something to end immigration family separation, local groups from San Antonio and across Texas are coming together today to try and ensure he remains true to his word. Eyewitness News reporter Charlie Cooper has more on how they're doing that.
What would Jesus do? That's what dozens of protesters headed to Brownsville and McAllen, Texas, are asking President Donald Trump to consider as far as immigration relations go. They're making their way to the Valley to be a part of a candlelight prayer walk in protest against President Trump's zero-tolerance policy. Now, it's separated hundreds of children from their families who have come to the country illegally seeking asylum. Images from within those holding facilities that they're being held in show people locked inside of cages, children sleeping under aluminum foil first aid blankets and crying for their parents.
This is about human beings. This is so inhumane what is being done. And so please, I beg of you, pray with us.
We are the model of what other countries should be. A free country, a country of opportunities, of liberties, pursuit of happiness, where you could pursue an American dream. You're subjecting them to an American nightmare.
Now, many people, including those on that bus, are begging Trump to simply use his executive authority to put all of this to an end. And they're asking that if families are detained at the border, that they're at least kept together. Back to you.